the very first place you have to start is with yourself. And one of the best places to start is in absolute silence. All these stories together that form your identity. And the core of that identity is beliefs and values, right? And then from there, you go and tell stories about those beliefs and values.
Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. Let me ask you a question, and I'd like you to really think about this question. Who are you? And if I asked you that and said, I'd like you to write down in a notebook or a piece of paper in front of you or the notes on your phone, worst case scenario, who are you? What would you write down? What comes to your mind when I ask you the question, who are you? Do you write down that you are a parent of 2 kids? Do you write down that you are a husband, a wife? Do you write down that you are a leader inside of a company? Do you write down that things come easily to you? Do you write down that things don't come easily? Do you write down that you are an underdog? What is it that you write? And then I'd like you to think about what came to your mind, and I'd like to ask you, where did that story come from? Did it come from you? Did it come from challenging circumstances in your life that caused you to sit back and realize this is who I am? Is this a story that you've been carrying around with you since you were 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old? Is this a story that was developed inside of your career? Was this identity given to you by somebody else and you've continued to carry it through your entire life? Regardless of what your answer is, regardless of what you wrote down, this is going to be a conversation today all about the power of personal narrative and how you can use it as a leader for yourself, with your family, with your community, or inside of the company that you work with or your business. And to do that, we've got a very special guest. His name is Kurian Tharakan, and we're going to talk about the power of personal story. When you take even one thing away from this conversation with Kurian, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You are the reason that we've grown to thousands of subscribers with several hundred episodes, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. And if you don't know who Kurian Tharakan is, let me give you an introduction. Kurian is the founder of the sales and marketing strategy firm called Strategy Peak. And he is a sales and marketing advisor and a 27-year veteran of the sales and marketing industry, almost 3 decades in this world. He has consulted for companies in numerous sectors, and he is also the author of the Amazon bestseller, The 7 Essential Stories That Charismatic Leaders Tell, which details how anyone can move people and mountains with the power of story. Very interesting conversation and topic. I hope you take a lot out of it. Without further ado, Kurian, it's great to have you here, sir. Thanks for being here.
Brandon, thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So we've heard about story. We've heard about identity. In your opinion, what is the power of this thing that we call personal narrative?
Well, the power, the only way we can understand our world is through the stories we tell ourselves about it. So identity, in order for it to be formed, it has to have story behind it. So anything you have, where you came from, what you do, where you're going, who you are, all these things can only be related to yourself or other people through a narrative of some kind. And there's multiple narratives. They integrate together. They form part of an identity narrative complex. Right? So it's all these stories together that form your identity. And the core of that identity is beliefs and values, right? And then from there, you go and tell stories about those beliefs and values. It's the only way we can understand our world or relate other people to how we think and what we do.
Is this something that most people from your experience are doing in a conscious way, a subconscious way? Are there people who don't have a story? Is there benefit to not having a story, or do we all have a story that we're sharing whether we realize it or not?
Well, we all do it subconsciously. Otherwise, we can't function in society. Right? We have to do this. We can only relate to society, any people, any institutions by the stories we tell. And you said it earlier, are we underdog? Are we the up and comer? What is the archetypes that we really gravitate to in the way of how we see ourselves in the world? So we all do it subconsciously. The trick is to do it consciously via strategy. That is the whole thing, because, when it comes to storytelling, ultimately, we're talking about your personal brand. And your personal brand is going to ultimately be created by you or created by the world. And the world's version of you may not be the one you want. So we have to take a conscious and strategic outlook on it to really build that narrative into something that serves us.
So isn't it interesting how we can so easily share a story that maybe was crafted by other people or that we've been carrying for years and years and years that might not even be serving us, such as the story of I never win anything. I'm not a lucky person. You know, things have never come easily to me. I was abandoned. I was never looked after, things like this. But when we do begin to consciously create a new story, and I'll share a little bit of my experience with that, when we do begin to create a story, it can feel inauthentic. And it can feel as if that's not really, quote unquote, who we are, when that original story that we were operating from was either given to us or is false or isn't serving us. It's just interesting to me how a new, powerful story that we create can seem like it was crafted. And because it seems like it was crafted, can be more difficult for us to adopt.
Yeah, or you look to your history and you fill it with so much evidence that supports the narrative that you have, that the narrative is incontrovertible. And so the evidence is a big part of it. Now, at the very beginning, it's sort of fake it till you make it. That's one of the things about adopting new identities. If you're one of the tricks to becoming brave is to pretend you're brave.
Yeah.
And actually just step out of that. Assume the identity of what a brave person would do in that circumstance and adopt that identity. And when you start behaving like a brave person, even though you may not have done that in a previous thing, you start to adopt the characteristics, the character traits, the values and beliefs of brave people, right? And that's how you become a brave person. So the evidence it can be, accumulated over time. But at the very beginning, you just sort of have to step into that identity and see if you can live it.
Very interesting. Obviously, this is a very important topic to you. You wrote your book about it. Again, the name of Kurian's book is The 7 Essential Stories That Charismatic Leaders Tell. And you don't just write a book on this, and this isn't an important topic unless you've lived this heavily in your life. So I'm curious to hear from you. When did personal narrative and story become a focal point? Because when I was first introduced to this idea, Kurian, I was 8 years. So this was 8 years ago. I was 21 years old. And I was overweight. I was unhappy. I was doing well financially, but I had nothing else going for me. And a mentor of mine gave me the book called The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. And this book introduced me to different ways of thinking, such as think about what you want and you'll attract it to you, right? If you think about lack, you'll attract lack. If you think about debt, you'll attract debt. And I started to think about these things in a different way. And like we were just talking about, at first, I thought these are really weird, right? This isn't who I am. But if this is going to help me, then every single day I'll write down the gratitude statements. I'll write down who I actually am, even if it doesn't feel good at the beginning. But eventually, I adopted these characteristics and began to craft a different story. And I'm still in that process, right? So when did this become important for you so much that you wrote a book about it?
Well, I'm a marketing strategy consultant, sales and marketing strategy consultant. I worked with a lot of new startups. And when it came to these startups, none of them, they're all run by engineers and scientists and, various types of very educated people out of the university. A lot of them came from that background. And none of them went to school to learn how to sell themselves or sell the company. So they were actually forced into a situation where they are now having to sell their idea, sell the opportunity, sell people on joining them in their company. And because they had no real background in sales, we needed to come up with a different method for them to do this naturally. And the most natural method is that we have to we tell stories. And if we take a look at what people buy in anything or anybody, they never buy the product first. Okay, they buy the big idea first. The key narratives around that big idea, all wrapped up in a transformation story with your prospect as the hero. Now, your prospect may be your future spouse. It could be that, great employee you want to bring over into your company. It may be that whopper client that you want to land, right? So all of these people, what they have to buy into first is the big idea. Then the key messages supporting that big idea, all wrapped up in the transformation story. And that transformation story takes them from where they are today to where they want to be. Now, when it comes to yourself, that's the same thing. You have to sell yourself on that big idea. What is that big idea? And it might be, I want to lose weight. I want to put on muscle. I want to make more money. I want to attract love. And then there's a series of stories that go either counter to that or, or support that in order for you to move forward to that goal. But it all starts with a story. It doesn't start with a tactic. It doesn't start with a strategy, unless that strategy is create the story.
Yeah.
And until you buy into that story, until somebody buys into your story, the big idea with the key messages, all in that wrapped up in that transformation story, until they buy into that, they won't buy anything else. Right? They can't, because they don't believe you. So that's the first place that you have to start for anything that you want to attract into your life.
Okay. So we've got this big idea, right? We've got the product. So let's say that you can have an item as a product, a service as a product, but let's talk first as ourselves, as the leader, as the product. Okay. And in order for us to help serve others, we have to serve ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves before we have to respect us before others respect us. So as the leader, and then we'll talk about how we can help others on our teams, perhaps, to adopt these ideas. As the leader in the product, the big idea, let's say the big idea is, like you mentioned, I want to make more money. I want to attract love. I want to lose weight. Okay, great. So how do you then craft the stories that back up the big idea? Is it just sitting down with a pen and paper? Is it a conscious exercise? What does it look like? How do you teach this?
Well, shockingly enough, the teaching part is that I teach them the 7 stories they have to craft, for whatever. If you're building an enterprise, launching a new product, you're participating in some kind of mass movement, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. The very first place you have to start is with yourself. And one of the best places to start is in absolute silence. In absolute silence. And you picture the goal. And you actually, go through all the different things that come up surrounding that goal, whether it's attainable, whether there's obstacles to it, all these kind of things. And you make sure that you catalog all of these things after you come out of that meditation. And, what did Blaise Pascal say? All of humankind's problems is based on their inability to sit alone quietly in a room by themselves.
Wow.
And that, some of the best ideas I've ever come up with, regardless of, how much stress I was in or not, have been where I was able to dissolve myself from the outer reality and go within and go to a mind state where it is clear. It is clear, it is unaffected, and I put the seed of the question into that blank space, that void, right? And let me tell you, that's a very difficult thing to do because your mind is full of chatter. The Buddhists will call it monkey mind.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult thing to do. I can do it for very short periods of time, but when I do it properly, all sorts of things happen at that point. I am a true believer in the philosophy that your reality is a perfect reflection of the state of your mind. So you project this reality, whatever that is. If it's full of opportunities, if it's full of obstacles, full of joy, full of pain, whatever it is. And you can create your realities as a result of it. Lucky people tend to think of themselves as lucky people. And they're able to see more lucky opportunities in what's in front of them. So where it begins is, for me anyways, is in that blank state of mind, where you are in total silence for whatever period of time you can do. You put the seed of the question there, the seed of the idea, the goal, and all sorts of things will flood to you if you're doing it properly.
So you're sitting in front of this startup CEO or executive, and they're an engineer and they're educated, and they're like, Kurian, we brought you in because we're ready to bring this product to market. You're the guy to help us with 3 decades of experience. And you say, okay, step 1, start with you, right? Time to create your personal story. And now you've got this leader in front of you, and they're like, start with me. Like, Kurian, we need to market this product, right? Like, how do we start with me? How do you kind of a two-part. How do you identify the stories that these individuals are already operating from? And what questions are we asking ourselves in order to strengthen and or create a new story for ourselves in that quiet time, in that meditative state?
If I'm sitting in front of a CEO, and I just did this yesterday, and I regularly do this. We're not going into a meditative state at that point in time. At that point in time, I have at my stage in career, I am pretty ruthless with our clients, and I'm not afraid of asking some really tough questions that get them to question themselves and why they're here and what they're doing, right?
Mm.
Because until I can get them to that point, and everything else is tactical. It's not about the deep inspirational why to what they're doing. Like you started this podcast and you're actually a veteran. You're 2 years into it. That is veteran territory. And
Hmm.
so, I could easily ask you, why did you start this podcast? And it better not be to, I wanted to get famous. And I'll bet you it wasn't.
But let me
And
ask you
even if
this:
it
the
was,
answer, not to interrupt you, Kurian, but
yeah,
because that's important. Why is the answer of "I want to get famous" a bad thing? And that's not my answer. But is that necessarily a bad story if someone did want to get famous and start a successful podcast?
it's very superficial.
Okay.
Because ultimately the famous part is that doesn't get to root cause or root motive.
Okay.
So the real question is, why do you want to get famous? Why
Mm.
why why and ultimately, if I go in one direction, that could be, what, I was always the kid that was picked last for the sport teams. Okay.
Mm.
I no one ever thought that I would be amount to anything. And I want to show the world that I am substantive. That could
Now
be
that
one of
is the same thing, just deeper though, is it not?
it's much deeper, right? Famous is the outcome. Okay. It is not the root motive, root cause of why the actions are taking place. So we got
Got
to
it.
get to that deep, heart-centered, gut-centered aspects of it. Then the mind takes that heart and gut centers of that angst or that desire, and then translates it into some kind of a plan. And
Yeah.
that plan might also be include, right? You know what? You're right. I am worthless. I better hide. Or say, you know what? I'm not worthless. I am going to do great things. And Lady Gaga never ever believed that she was, to be in a corner somewhere, unobserved and unwanted. She always had that deep belief in herself. She had a bad boyfriend at one point. She tells the story, and she replied, and he said, "You're never going to get anywhere." Right? I'm summarizing,
Yeah.
paraphrasing. And she said, "One day you won't be able to go anywhere without hearing my name." And what ended up happening?
Everywhere.
What ended up happening? So your stories drive who you are, why you're here, and where you're going. It just has to do that.
Does your story change as you go through time? And how often do you spot a story changing in a constructive way, especially from a leadership perspective? How often should your personal story change? Are some constant, and which ones are shifting and changing?
Well, the stories from a business perspective have to change. So the products that Apple put out 20 years ago are laughable in the marketplace today because competition has caught up, right? But they were cutting edge at that time. And so if we take a look at, how their stories have changed, remember the very first thing that anybody buys from you is the big idea. And the big idea, from 15 years ago, whatever the time period was going to be iPad, iPod, right? And maybe a colorful Mac. It would be those kind of things. I remember selling the black and white Mac in the bricks boxes, right? And wow, when I saw the color Mac, oh my God, it's a color scheme, color screen. How did that happen? And it's the idea. Okay, it's the actual, I'm buying into the big idea. And then I'm creating all sorts of stories in my head. And then we're moving forward to some kind of an action, where that transformation story can take place. So the stories from how you will achieve things may need to change over time. What doesn't change as often are the deep motives for that story. And so motives, values, belief systems.
Mm.
And as by the time you're in your teens and you're in your 20s, your your character and identity is reasonably well formed at that point. I'm not a psychologist, but you might go through some wild phases in your 20s where you're testing things, but eventually you revert back to the values that you were brought up with. A lot of people, right? The values that you actually had. It may not be the ones that your parents gave you, but the values you had very early in life. You might test those values, but the gravity brings you back to those core things again. And that's who you are. The people that you were when you were 8, 9, 10 years old, there's a lot of similarity to how that happens in your 20s and 30s. That's just what it is. So those things and the stories surrounding those things, those values and beliefs, don't change very much. But how you adapt to the current environment does. In the book, I use the example of there's a whole chapter in there about values and beliefs, and the difference between values and beliefs can be illustrated in high fashion, haute couture. So haute couture in the 1920s fashion runways, or the 1700s, Parisian, royalty, that kind of thing. Haute couture would be only considered nostalgic today. And you can recognize the luxury in those things. Wow, that must have cost a fortune back then, but look how elegant she looked for her time. The difference between that and culture is culture takes the values of that time, because it's the same values: indulgent fabrics, handcrafted, very meticulously tailored, right? Experience, high experience, luxurious, a decadent type of experiences with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then translates it for the modern time. So what would that look like? What does indulgent fabrics, meticulous tailoring, form-fitting fabrics that make you look one of a kind, how does that look today compared to how does that look? How did that look in the 1920s?
Yeah.
And the only thing that's changed is not the values. What's changed is the story.
Yeah, true. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you're speaking with me, right? And if everything begins with the big idea, and then all the stories stem from the big idea, it sounds to me like the quality of the stories we create is a direct reflection of the quality of the big idea that we have at the time. Would you agree with that?
It depends how good a storyteller you are, right?
Okay.
So now let's look at beliefs, values, create several big ideas, not just one big idea, several big ideas that you might have, right? And you might have one with orbits of the other, but they're all interlocked. Then they come up with the key messages supporting those big ideas and the transformation stories. It becomes a story complex, a narrative complex. So if you take a look at the big major religions, if you go to the Bible, most people in Western culture are familiar with the stories of the Bible. All those stories interlock and support the bigger narrative. So you got Old Testament narratives, you got New Testament narratives, but all those stories interlock, to support the various big ideas that the religion, in that case Christianity, is trying to promote. That doesn't mean the stories are good. Okay, so the Bible has survived all these years, Old Testament, New Testament. They survive because the stories are very, very resonant and relevant. You can say the same thing about Islam. You can say the same thing about Hinduism. All the big religions really do this well, the storytelling well. And the stories support the big ideas, which in turn support the beliefs and values of that religion.
Okay. Gotcha. So let's say you're working with me, and for everyone listening, they might be saying, okay, well, how can I get behind a big idea so that it may be easier for me to create stories that back this up? How would you help me if I didn't know what my big idea was? If I didn't necessarily know what my vision was, if I didn't know, maybe I'm lost at this point in my life. Maybe I lose my previous story. How do you help me craft that big idea?
I have to get to your why. Okay. And then there's two whys actually. The first why is, why did you do this? The second why, in an enterprise situation where you're selling something to somebody else, you have to look at their why. And the nexus, the interlocking position between the prospect story and your story is where value can be created.
Okay.
If those stories don't intersect, no value created. But when the stories intersect, that's the potential for value. That's how value is potentially created. I just watched the BlackBerry movie, and Apple absolutely understood what the telecom carriers and the customer wanted much better than BlackBerry did. And BlackBerry basically, dwindled to nothing overnight. And in that situation, from as far as their phone product goes, that might be a few years still. But like they cease to have relevance almost immediately. And then there's some diehards that are still buying the product and such. But Apple just rockets on the scene. Everybody wants an iPhone, right? Because their story intersects with the customer story in a much better way. And their customers, two customers. It's the end consumer and the carrier that they buy the product from. We got to satisfy both those stories.
Yeah. Okay, so if you could have stepped in there and spoke to the CEO of BlackBerry and you knew he would listen to you, right, or she, I don't know, what would you have helped them to do differently in order to better connect with the audience?
It depends when I would have actually talked to them, right?
Okay.
And at the very beginning, it's all about, if you took a look at how the movie rolled out, it was very much about selling the story of being able to take this other band that was sitting on top of the telephone, wireless, and be able to send short message service texts with it, right? And we have a way that it won't crash your cell towers and all that kind of stuff. And so that story there, we are getting to this idea. What is the big idea? The big idea was SMS.
Okay.
Right? That was the big idea. Texting was the big idea. Then texting with security was the big ideas,
Yes.
like super clear security, super strong security. And then eventually that story lost relevance as the age of smartphones, real smartphones came about. But that also took, advances in cellular technology. I think they had to have at least 3G to do that. Maybe
Okay.
2G. I'm not a telecom expert, right? But as the landscape of technology moves, demographics, economics moves, all that kind of stuff, there's 6 big macro trends that move. The relevance of your story has to move with it, or you cease to exist. And that's what happened to BlackBerry.
So they
And
failed to update their story.
they failed to update their story in a way that was functionally relevant and emotionally significant to their two prospects. And the two prospects are their telco carrier, the various telco carriers, Verizon, whoever it is, right? And then with the end consumer as well. Because when I saw an iPhone, my God, that's what I want. I still held on to my little BlackBerry for a little while. Because the BlackBerry did one thing for me that nothing else could. And that was it did the little messaging in a way that I could see a red receipt and such, right? And so that was really good. The second that I knew that the iPhone could do that better, or at least as well, I abandoned the BlackBerry.
Yeah. Wow. What a way to fall behind in such a giant, fantastical way, because you'd think it would be an obvious thing. Okay, there's a new competitor on the market with a different product that's similar to ours. It's promising the same things, but they're relating more to the audience. BlackBerry had this stint of time to, I come from the telecom industry, to give you an example. And for years that the iPhone was out, we were still selling BlackBerry phones. So they had time in order to revive the story, craft a new story, but they didn't, right? When, from your experience, what's the reason why these large companies with smart, intelligent leaders who are educated, why didn't they craft a new story? You might not know from BlackBerry specifically, unless the movie mentioned it, but what stops us from creating a new story? Is it ego? Is it ignorance? What is it?
It's all of the above. Right? It's all of the above. So you bought into your story so deeply that you fail to see what other relevant stories might be superior to the story that you have. And you can see this across all of human history. And most recently, you can see it in the BlackBerry story. You can see it in the Kodak story. You can see it in the IBM PC story of 1981, where the arrogance was so high, once we get our IBM PC out there, everybody will only buy blue, right? IBM blue. And the arrogance was so high that they allowed Mr. Gates just to license the software, right? They didn't buy exclusive rights to it because they were so arrogant about this. And so Gates then licenses to every clone manufacturer out there. And I don't know anybody who has an IBM PC or laptop anymore. I don't see it. I'm working off a Microsoft Surface right now, but I've had Dells, I've had all sorts of things, right? It almost doesn't matter because the hardware is secondary to the software. The actual experience is delivered by the software. And almost anybody can manufacture a super thin, very long, long battery longevity laptop now, right? Yeah. Maybe that was cutting edge technology at some points in time, but now, that hardware race is a race to the bottom. The software race, who won that? Microsoft did.
Yeah.
And what's Microsoft now? The $3 trillion company, right? Whatever it is. Crazy stuff.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've got the big idea, right? We know what it is we're looking to achieve. So let's talk from the personal narrative side first, and then we'll go to the company. So our big idea is I want to make more money, and you dive deep into the motive and you learn that the person comes from maybe not having much money, but they know it's possible. They see other people who do it, right? So they know they want to make more money. Okay, great. What goes into crafting a great story? What are some key components of a great story that holds up and is powerful?
Okay, and you want to do this from the personal perspective, right?
Yep.
Okay, so the very first question is going to be, I want to make more money. Why? Why do I want to make more money? And it doesn't always come from a place of lack. I see a lot of, very intriguing situations of kids, of highly successful parents that want to show dad. That's the inner motive. Show dad they can do exactly what the old man can. And to build a company and have that level of monumental success. So that could be a reason for what it is. So until you get to that deep set of beliefs, values, motives, you can't craft the story. And so the story becomes now, so why do I want to do this? I want to show the old man. 1, I want to put a dent in the universe. 2, that's pure Steve Jobs. That's his line. I want to put a dent in the universe, right? To make insanely great products. And so based on that, then the question becomes, what are the stories that come from that? If we go to the Steve Jobs example, it was never about money. It was about, wow, that first Apple One that came out was just a circuit board, right? You had to go get a monitor for it and all that kind of stuff. Maybe a keyboard came with it. I don't know, but it was just, they sell the circuit boards at the very beginning. And so it was just this amazing awe that we could be in business in this very cool industry. That was the microcomputer industry back in 1975, 74, whatever the time period was, right? And then once you do that, you can craft the stories of why you do this, what you will be doing, and how you will do it. And obviously, he focused on the microcomputer for education purposes for a very long time, up until the point where he developed the Lisa, because he saw that marketplace and almost all of Apple's profits up until the Lisa. And the Lisa didn't take off very well, but all of Apple's profits were still coming from the Apple II Plus and the Apple III and all that kind of stuff. So old technology. And it wasn't until he was banished to the wilderness and he was brought back 10 years later that, Apple's fortunes just absolutely took off, because he had matured quite a bit differently and he saw the world differently as well. And he was able to bring that next software back to power the new generation of Macs. And, where's Apple today? Apple's probably a $2.5–3 trillion company.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm talking to you for my MacBook. So, I mean,
oh, there you go.
Yeah. I feel like everyone I know has at least one Apple product of some kind. Right.
Yeah.
And that's how big they are now because of that big vision they have. So, okay.
So let me just finish this one thing, right? So the stories that you tell them. So if you ever go to a life coach, one of the things that they might get you to do is to write your eulogy. So what is the eulogy you want somebody to say at your funeral? Okay, about how you lived, what you did, what you accomplished, what your legacy is, all that kind of stuff. And you write it from the future perspective looking back. So that gives you the framework for the stories to create.
That's powerful. I
Yeah.
love that. Okay. So let me ask you maybe to give us an example so we can see how you personally do this for yourself. So you wrote your book several years back. And again, the title of your book, it's in the description as well, is The 7 Essential Stories That Charismatic Leaders Tell. Why did you write this book? What was your reason for writing this book? What's your deep motive?
So this is a very sad story, okay? Because I wrote, and I had always wanted to be an author. Always wanted to be an author. And I wrote that first draft of the book, and I had an editor help me, clean it up, etc. And it was a very straightforward process. What I'd do is I would record a chapter. Okay, we do work on a chapter at a time, and I'd record the chapter into a recording device, right, on my iPhone or whatever it was, and then we'd transcribe that chapter. Then we'd start editing the heck out of it, and we got through a whole bunch of chapters. And when I got that book back, after the polishing and things like that, it was very exciting to me to see that PDF in its final form. And I'm flipping through the chapters, flip. And I was thinking to myself, my God, this is utter crap. It's terrible. I wouldn't read this because it was so ego driven that I failed to actually understand what it is that I was trying to do. And ultimately, what I was trying to do is to deliver value to the audience. If I went out to be a published author or be famous or whatever else, it didn't work. So I threw out that first draft altogether, threw it out, except for one chapter. And that one chapter, I didn't record into a mic. Mm-hmm. That one chapter, I sat down on a keyboard and I just banged it out over the course of a couple of days, right? And I looked at that chapter, and out of all the stuff in that original draft, that first chapter was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. I actually got something out of it because when I read it, I'd forgotten I'd said a couple of things, and that I got to remember that. Because that is the essence of the truth of the chapter, or whatever else it is, right? So I got something out of it reading, and it kept me engaged and kept me enthralled, and it kept me focused. So I, over the next, 16 months, just sat down and I banged out the remaining, and there's like 14 chapters total, right? Mm-hmm. Total of 14 chapters in the, what do you call it? In the book, approximately, maybe 15 with the conclusion. And once that was done, it all flowed because I'm not writing for myself anymore. I was writing for my customer. Okay. And the customer, unless the customer got solid value out of this, I failed as an author. Okay. And I'm certainly not going to be respected as an author. That's for sure. Because ultimately, in every interaction, and I say this of every interaction, okay, is that you have to leave that interaction, whether it be you and a customer, you and a friend, you and somebody you just met, you got to leave that interaction having added value to it. If you haven't added value, you've only taken value, you can only do that so many times before you're not invited back. Right? So what value can you add to that situation?
And that in itself is a story also.
Yes.
That is a story. Like the idea of when I'm with somebody, it is my duty to add value to that human being in some shape, way, or form, because not everyone has that value, belief, and or story. Right. So it sounds to me like when you were writing your book, your story shifted from this early desire of, I want to be an author, I will be an author, that's a goal of mine, to, yes, I want to be an author, but even more importantly, I want to deliver and add value to the people who are reading this book. And that story shift completely changed the course of the book.
Right. Without question. Without question, like that lens now you have, it comes out to different things. So in any particular situation, like down in the U.S., the lenses are so important because they create different values. I'm sorry, they support different values and they create different narratives. So it doesn't matter what the hard facts are. So I'm going to put out a statement. Wind power is the future of energy independence for the U.S. Nation, for the U.S. public. Okay, and if you are a Republican, you will have a very different set of narratives that come out of that statement than if you're a Democrat or if you're an independent. That you have no no real horse in the race, right? You get these kind of things. And so, and what drives those stories are the values that create the lens that you view the story through. And so just a simple statement creates different stories depending on the lenses of value.
Wow. It's so fascinating too, because you say to put a different lens on it. So let's say you're looking at it through the lens of a Republican versus the lens of a Democrat. It doesn't even mean these stories are true, right? A story doesn't even have to be true in order for it to drive you to get a specific result.
The stories can be, well, first of all, stories get you results. Well, you may or may not like the results you get. The stories are the medium that that is necessary for you to get the result.
Yes.
Right. That's the very first thing you've got to have. Without the story, you have no direction.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the very first thing. But the stories, can take the same set of facts and then they derive different meaning associated with it. That's the big difference right there.
Yes.
Different meanings.
Okay, so we spoke a lot about personal narrative. So now you've worked with this leader of the company. You've helped them uncover their story, their big idea, their big vision. But now they've got, and in these startups, they've got 50 to 100 people who also have their own narrative. They also have their own stories that they're operating from. So as the leader, how do we help our people to craft empowering stories, but also craft a story that aligns with the big vision of the business?
And so that's the whole purpose of the book, the 7 essential stories charismatic leaders tell. The first half of the book is all about the culture of your organization. Culture is the always on operating system that guides behavior, even when there's no one to watch, reward, or punish that behavior. People just know what to do. And then that culture produces results. But in order to get performance out of that culture in the direction you want it to go, you infuse it with the 7 stories.
Okay.
The culture infused with stories. Now, if you don't take a deliberate thought to the stories you want to put into that culture, then the culture forms its own stories, because all cultures abhor a story vacuum. Right there. And so they are craving these kinds of stories. The reason these big religions are big today is because their stories fulfill those 7 story categories.
Okay.
The 7 story categories are creation and origin, identity, values, and beliefs. The big idea, the central thing that everything revolves under. The enemy we face. Okay, in the big religions, you're facing Satan, right? But in a company, we're facing a slew of substandard products out there that we are going to absolutely skyrocket the user experience with. You can fight against childhood poverty. You can fight against adult illiteracy. There's also what's the enemy we face? The mighty winds, which are the big macro trends that affect everybody in the marketplace, and the 6 trends that are always present, right? Societal trends, technological, economic, environmental, political, legislative trends, and all these trends buffet each of our ships in that competitive sea. The next one, story 6, is the journey we must undertake. If all those things are true, that's the left side of the equation, equals the journey we must undertake. Well, it's obvious we have to go in this direction now, right? And that's the basis of it. And then the final one is the 7th story is a meta narrative that combines all the previous 7 stories into a single telling. But it's short and it's punchy, and it allows you to get everything you want to get in an interview, okay, in a 10-minute, 5-minute presentation. And then people, when they are intrigued by aspects of those story categories, you can go deeper into one of the previous 5.
Okay, wow. So without going into each of the steps, because I want people to grab your book, and I know they will, because that sounds fantastic, and that sounds very relevant to the person as well as to the organization, and you can follow them for both areas. Okay, so out of those 7 steps and the 7 different stories we tell, which one is the most challenging to adopt, and or which one has stumped the most people when you're working with them? that you found yourself spending more time on this story because of either its significance or difficulty to tell or adopt?
They're all very easy to tell once you become real with yourself.
Become real with yourself.
Become real with yourself. You get down to core values, core beliefs, really understand, why you are doing this. And it can't be for money. It can't be for fame. Okay. Because those are, those are superficial. You have to get to the core motives, the root motives for why you are doing it. Once you have those in place, then you can start adopting what these beliefs are. Okay. And one of the clearest things, here's an example, right? Will the world be living a abundant, clean energy life in 100 years? Or are we still going to be reliant on fossil fuels?
Mm-hmm.
What's the story? Okay, and so that is the end goal story, right? And so if it's clean energy, everybody has their own little micro generator. You're not even reliant on a grid anymore. It's being fed by, water, wind, and solar energy, whatever it is, right? It's completely different things when it comes to whether we are going to live an abundant life of clean energy or still be reliant on fossil fuels and perhaps facing some kind of continued problems because of the CO2 issues.
Okay. Do you believe it's possible? Maybe possible is not the best word, but I'll let you take this however you do. Is it possible for us to get to that core reason on our own, or does it require the help and introspection of a mentor, someone we trust? What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I think everybody can get to it on their own if you're real with yourself, but it's often easier if you have somebody that guides you through that process. Yesterday, I was with a software company CEO, and I was not letting him off the hook. He's concentrated on sprints and scrums and things like that. And I said to him, your customer doesn't care about that. They don't care about sprints. They don't care about scrums, because those are all aspects of a process that deliver an end result to them. What is that tangible, concrete end result that they want? And it might be a time billing system. Okay, and that works. That allows all their field personnel to sign in and know exactly where they're at, and then management to allocate resources more properly. That's the problem. It's not that we are not running enough proper sprints or scrums, right?
Yeah.
But so he was very much locked into this state where he is focused on the process and not the outcome. But that's the world that he comes from, right? So, and it's not that he couldn't go to this other level. It's that no one has ever challenged him to go to that other level, right? And look at it from a different lens.
Yes. Or people have been afraid to challenge him.
Well, that could be as well, because he's the boss, right?
Exactly.
And one of the lines that we had with people was that and I say this to everybody, at my stage, I just don't care anymore. I'm going to push back.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not giving me the answers that are real and absolutely clear and things like that, we're both not helping each other.
Yes.
We can't get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you care, but through your experience that the direct route and the way that you deliver it is the more effective route.
It's much more effective. And, and they have to get to a point where they are crystal clear on the motives. Okay. And then the stories will flow from the beliefs and values that support those motives. Yeah. And those are dual orbits, right? Beliefs, values, motives, all form and orbited around each other. But then the stories come as a result of that. And those stories are in conflict with those beliefs, values, and motives. Then we got a problem. When they are aligned, then we get going. But that's not to say that's even the best story. There could be always superior stories. And, BlackBerry was the best story for years until it wasn't.
Yeah, that's true. Imagine a world where everyone picks up your book. They really look into themselves. They're real with themselves. They find out what that big idea is. They find out what that motive is. They dig deep. They create stories to support that idea. And then they're taking action towards that big idea in a way that serves them. I can't imagine a world that looks like that. I mean, I can imagine a world, and that's the beauty of it, but that's certainly not the world we're in. And my question for you is, with the uncertainty in the world, with the world that we're in right now, with the direction that we're going and the direction you believe we're going, what do you want and hope that your book accomplishes in the next few years, if you could create any outcome that you wanted when people grab your book?
The ultimate outcome is to have a dead simple framework for you to tell stories. And you don't even have to tell all of them. It would be really helpful if you told all of them and you understood them at least for yourself and your core leadership team, right? But you have a dead simple framework that has been proven over millennia. The reason that the great religions are so big today, and there's been thousands of religions throughout history, thousands, but today there's some very dominant ones. We have, Christianity is at probably 2.1, 2.2 billion people. Islam is at 1.9 billion people. Judaism, which the first two come from, right? Judaism is only 15 million.
Yeah.
But it is a profound, these are all Abrahamic religions, right? But then we have Buddhism, which is not quite a religion, but more a philosophy, but then Hinduism and, all these different types of things. But it drops like a rock like this after. There's still, thousands of religions in the world today, but these ones dominate. Why do they dominate? Because of superior story.
Wow.
And superior story, they have clear beliefs, values, and motives, that create a culture that Islam is different than Christianity, which is different than Hinduism, for example. There's some common traits. Love is a common trait amongst all of them. Love is the central part of it. They'll have very common codes of conduct, right? But the way they practice and worship and things like that and who they worship is very different. But the stories are what allow people to be brought into the tent okay, and keep them in the tent. Okay, so the revival tent, is still well and alive. But what brings you in? The possibility of story. What keeps you in? The relevance, resonance of the story. Yeah. And so what story, you can't get away from it. This is the central aspect of how you relate to your world, how people relate to you. So either you master your stories or the world is going to master those stories for you. And those stories may not be the ones you want.
Yeah. So true. So true. Life in itself is a story. And what we've talked about is so important. And we talked about it for just close to an hour, but we didn't even scrape the surface. So guys, go to the description, right? Go on Amazon, buy a copy of Kurian's book, The 7 Essential Stories That Charismatic Leaders Tell. And let us know what you think, right? Go to the description, grab a copy. Kurian, where's the best place for people to follow you and your continued progress forward?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can come on to my website, strategypeak.com. You can actually download a copy of the book, the first couple of chapters of the book. You can download that there, and you can get the book on any Amazon. It's a whopping 99 cents this month.
Wow.
And that's for the Kindle version. And then the paperback is a little bit more money. But 99 cents, you can download that lickety split.
Amazing. Cool. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for sharing these ideas.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you. Thank you, sir. You have a great day.
Thanks for having me on the show, Brandon.
What are the stories that you tell? What is your big idea? If we revisit that first question that I asked at the very beginning of the show, who are you? And recraft that answer now with what you heard from Kurian, what you thought about as he went through his philosophy and talked a bit about the 7 stories that we tell. Right? Who are you? I know that I've got a lot to think about myself. Put yourself in a quiet space today, whether it's on a quiet walk without earbuds, without music, in a quiet place in your home, and just take the time to really ask yourself these questions. Because by taking that little bit of time in order to really ask yourself, who am I? What are my beliefs and values? What are my motives? By taking that time, the rest of your life changes in a better, more positive, and more powerful way. Be sure to go grab your copy of The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell by Kurian Tharakan. It is in the description. Go on Amazon, grab your Kindle copy for $1 or the hardcover for a bit more. And if you took something away from this conversation, again, please share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You are the best part of the Be Better team. Thank you for helping our show grow. I hope this helped you. Thanks so much for tuning in. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.